The date is December 5th, 2012, and it is Weird Build Wednesday here on your daily dose of D&D. Hello, my name is Mad Matt Wonkow, and it is Weird Build Wednesday here on your daily dose of D&D, the day I get to talk about cool character builds and character optimizations and stuff like that. Today is a fun little concept that I came up with a couple months ago, probably a little bit further, called the Whip Lord. And the Whip Lord is a hybrid shaman warlord who does not use either of their main attack stats. He instead has taken melee training to charisma and uses a whip to spur his allies forward into battle. As a hybrid, he gets to take powers from both classes, and if you know what you're doing, you can go through and select only powers, well, mostly only powers. There's one at will that requires you to use an attack stat, but the rest of them all use effects, where you say, you snap your whip, and then your allies spring into action. So it's a lot of fun if you have a large enough party. This is not a character build for when you have maybe 3 or 4 players with you. This is a character build that you use when there's maybe 8 of you at the table, and you're filling in as a leader role to be able to deal a lot more damage. Essentially, you have to go down all of the powers and check all of your options, and go through and take stuff from earlier levels and not take stuff at certain levels and things like that to be able to go through. But it is entirely possible. There are a couple of really fun ones, you know, where you forearmed is forewarned is one of them, which is, I believe, a warlord power, where you point at someone and say, "Hey, you melee thief, make 4 attacks," and the thief goes stab, 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 stab. So that's fun. The utility powers that you need to select, or at least the ones that I selected, are all about movement. It's really hard to give someone a melee basic attack if they're not adjacent to an enemy, so your utility powers need to reflect that. I don't have a Paragon Path or an Epic Destiny selected for it. A lot of that's really up to you. A lot of the stuff that would be there aren't going to be good for him. So, and I didn't have as much time to prepare as I normally like for Weird Build Wednesdays, so I did not go through and comb through all of my options to find the best one. So if you have a great Paragon Path that would work for someone who gives melee basic attacks as both a shaman and a warlord, please leave a comment down below, and I'll, if one of you guys give you an amazing one, I'll put it down below in my comment box, by which I mean the video description. As for feats, to qualify for whip training requires a dexterity of 13, which isn't too hard to get. 13's pretty low for what you need. I also went with charisma for his abilities, because there's a power that allows you to give charisma modifier +1 as a defense to an attack, and then the guy gets to make a melee basic attack. So it's pretty much, you didn't make an attack against him, and let's an attack. So, but it's possible that you could do this build with almost any stat, though charisma is probably the #1 mashup, secondary, what's it called, ability score between the two classes, with wisdom and maybe intelligence being tertiary ones. As for races, I went with Drow for my personal build, because they gave me a bonus to charisma and dexterity, but really anything that gives you a bonus to whatever you're choosing as your attack stat with your whip would be a good choice. I think that was a valid sentence. Race doesn't matter for this build. It is convenient to play a human to be able to pick up another at will. It is convenient as a half-elf to grab an at will from a different class. In fact, that might be one of your best choices, to grab something from the bard, perhaps. As for items, it gets a little bit complicated, because you need to be holding a, well, whip, but also a totem in your other hand. Your shaman powers are going to key off your totem and your spirit companion, whereas your warlord powers are mostly going to just key off snapping your whip at people, though the warlord powers are more yelling at people than actually making attacks. Your spirit companion will not be as useful as a real shaman spirit companion, but does a couple of nifty things. I do love the option that you get to move one of your allies adjacent to a monster spend a minor action to toss your spirit companion. Go, Flankermon! And suddenly they have combat advantage, and you use your standard action, and the thief gets, like, to sneak attack. That's always a lot of fun. So that's about it for the weird build today. The Whip Lord was his name. It's just kind of a mashup, and it's not anything way kitschy. It's just kind of a simple hybriding that allows you to use a secondary weapon, and I think that's kind of cool. So if you get the opportunity and you have a large enough group, check out the Whip Lord. Welcome to your DM's Corner today. It is World Building Wednesday here in the corner, and today we're going to talk about government just a little bit. I don't like talking about governments and politics outside of D&D, but inside D&D it's a very interesting thing that a lot of the governments that you see in Dungeons and Dragons tend to be dictatorships. Monarchies would probably be a better word for it. I think it's in Player Handbook 1 where they start talking about it, just in the beginning, talking about the world itself, how a couple, maybe 100 years ago, there used to be a massive empire, but it's since fragmented. And so you get little duchies here and kingdoms there, and maybe, you know, an earl, though I don't know exactly where that place is on the scale. But effectively everything's broken down, and so you have little contained kingdoms and no overwhelming nation, which is an interesting way to run it, and it allows all of the different campaigns that you play to happen inside their own area without really having to worry about exactly whose territory they are in or next to. More defined worlds, like Forgotten Realms and Eberron and so on and so forth, have a little bit more behind them because they know where the kingdoms lie. And that is an interesting thing, to be able to say, hey, we're neighbors to this guy. But still, all of the government types are normally the same. A rather feudal society where people pay taxes to a guy above them, who might pay taxes to a guy above him, who might pay taxes to a guy above him, depending on how far the chain goes. However, there's a lot more options to governments. For instance, I've been watching one of the Star Wars movies, and in there they have a Senate, you know, an actual republic, where people get to vote. They have talk about an empire, and then they also have all these little ones that are, you know, a guild, essentially, of merchants who have banded together and make decisions for this entire trade federation, was the name of it. You've probably heard those words before. There's also, from Star Wars, the people of Naboo have an interesting thing where they elect a queen for a couple of terms every year, and it's kind of presidential almost. Another interesting book series that I would recommend, is the word that I'm looking for, is the Heralds of Valdemar series by Mercedes Lackey, because they have a lot of different governments, countries, that are all around each other, and each one has an extremely different version of how they pick their ruler. I think it's very interesting that in the D&D games that I've played, I've not come across, you know, with so many deities in the game, I have not come across a theocracy. There's no one who says, oh look, we rule because we have a priest who says this is the god. However, you know, it doesn't, none of the gods have all power, per se, in D&D, but it's interesting that I've never run across those, and that would be an interesting thing to try and run into a campaign. There would also be an interesting one of, you know, there's a huge election coming up to decide on the local leaders, and maybe the heroes have to do something with that. But when you're coming up with your worlds, and you're figuring out what cities are where, and who exactly does what and what they believe in, remember that having a standard monarchy is a little boring as far as kings go. As far as governments go, not quite kings, but as far as governments go, it all gets kind of boring and tedious. Sure, it's nice to be able to fall back and say, oh yeah, it's the one that we all remember. I know how this works without even have to think about it. But it is cool sometimes to have to think about it, and to give a different flavor and a different spin on the game of D&D. Closing remarks today, this is still on my old computer, because my new computer doesn't internet well, and I haven't figured out how to fix that. So I'm working there on that. We will hopefully have that coming up soon. Thank you guys for watching me today talk about the weird builds and the world building. Thank you guys for watching your daily dose of D&D. If you honestly like this video, click the like button down below. If you like getting a daily dose of D&D, hit the subscribe button up above, and every day I will appear in your subscription box, like a carrier pigeon flying its way across vast oceans. If you know anyone who needs to see this video, go down to the bottom and click on the share button, or if you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, go up to the top to the address bar and grab the address and pass it to him through Facebook or email or however you will. My name is Mad Matt Wankow. This has been your daily dose of D&D. If you guys stay online, I will see you next time.